Welcome to April and Debbie Dish the Truth on Weight Loss, where we share the raw, real, and sometimes messy truth about our weight loss journeys.
I am Debbie, a weight loss coach who lost 100 pounds and have been living in maintenance for 4 years.
And I'm April, a weight loss coach currently down 75 pounds and continuing my journey to lose 100 more.
Together, we'll explore the ups, downs, and everything in between, showing you that lasting weight loss is possible no matter where you are on your path.
Yes. And today we're going to discuss the question, what if who you think you are changes everything?
Mhm. That could be that I think that's a very interesting subject. So, who do you think you are? Oh, that sounds like a
Well,
question like my mother used to, who do you think you are?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's so interesting. And I tapped into this and how it's affecting me even just this week on my walks in the morning when I do a lot of thinking. But I've talked on previous podcasts about my binging that I've had a lot in my life and how I handled things with that. And how when I was working on not binging over emotions, I stopped saying that I binged. So, like, even if I overate, I didn't say I binged today. I just said I overate or I ate off plan, and I didn't call myself a binger anymore. And it was just so helpful in moving forward because I was neutralizing what was happening, right? And I wasn't identifying as a binger any longer. And on my walk, I was listening to podcasts and I was thinking about something and I realized I constantly say I'm an emotional eater. I describe myself that way. People ask about my journey. I say I'm an emotional eater. So of course I'm still gonna be an emotional eater because I'm telling my brain this. There's such power in what you tell yourself you are, right? And we've talked about this. I know Debbie used a um version of this in one podcast about runners. Like a runner identifies as a runner or a jogger, whether they have fallen or they have even had a broken ankle. Like, I'm a runner, I'm a jogger. They still work towards that. They still identify as that. That's just who they are. And so they are. So if we tell ourselves something, whether it's good or bad, in the version of who we want to become, it's going to stick, right? So there's the power of that on a daily basis.
There is, and I am a recovering alcoholic, and we talked about this a little bit before we jumped on here. And I could continue to say I'm an alcoholic, and
Mhm.
when I am, but I'm in recovery. So, and you actually brought this up, which I think is fantastic. Like when I tell myself I'm a recovering alcoholic, it reminds me that I am in recovery and
Mhm.
not, I mean, just saying I'm an alcoholic doesn't say I'm an active drinker, but it also doesn't acknowledge that I'm not an active drinker. So being in recovery is a good way to differentiate in my brain and tell myself I'm a recovering alcoholic. But I also have noticed in our discussion, beforehand, I love that we talk beforehand, and you know what? For everybody listening, it's not much different than this. Could we just talk
No.
about it all?
Yeah.
But I have identified probably since right before, or actually right after COVID started, I identified as a woman who does not exercise. Now, that labeling of myself came as a result of being so sick of hearing people tell me that the only reason I was losing my weight was because I was exercising a lot. And when I look back, I was exercising 4 to 5 days a week for an hour. I don't think that's a lot. I think that is probably just exercising, and I loved it. But
Mhm.
once I heard that, I thought, hmm, okay, so you know what? I'm not going to exercise anymore. And I became a woman who doesn't exercise. And I kept telling myself that it was like a badge of honor. And so for all these years later, what almost 5 years, I have convinced myself. So the thought about getting up and walking like you do is like, nope, not doing that. And it's really really labeled myself something I don't want to be. So we can work on changing those labels too. And I would like to work on, it's work, it's progress. I am a woman who did love exercise, and I'm willing to see how it fits in my life now. You know what I mean? Maybe not so long, maybe a simpler one, but it's amazing what we call ourselves. Not a person who exercises, an emotional eater. We're confirming that thought to our brain every time we think it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's similar with exercise. I was not always the person who got up to walk before work or do any kind of movement. And I would always say that I'm not a morning person. I'm not a morning person, which in theory, I'm still not. Like, if I could exercise without getting up, that would be great, but that's not possible. That's not realistic. So I do have to move out of bed to do it. And I can choose, again, it all comes back to choices, but I can choose to do it at night. But I know me, and at the end of my workday, I'm tapped out and I don't want to. It's not my optimal time. So I wanted to get up in the morning before work, figure out a way to do it. And I had to put steps into action. And part of those steps was thinking, I'm working at becoming a person who wakes up in the morning to work out. And that's what I started telling myself. And it's kind of like a big question too. Like, it's such an interesting thing to talk about and debate what people think, but does your identity shape your destiny? And I believe it does. And I believe it's just like the people who become president or football player or even a teacher. Or oftentimes these people are thinking, I want to be a teacher. I'm a teacher. I want to be a football player. They do what they need to do to be a football player. And then they identify as that person. And it gets you there. It's kind of like manifestation, of what you want in your life. And if you're telling yourself that, then it's going to be easier to achieve whatever you're telling yourself.
And I also am a huge believer in manifestation. And but my sister, Carol, she knew from a very young age, she had an amazing second grade teacher, Miss Bulldog at Alton Central School. And Carol knew she wanted to be a teacher as a result of having Miss Bulldog. And like that is what she thought about all the time. I'm going to be a teacher. We have so many examples of people putting out there who they want to become, and when we believe it, the more we say it, the more we believe it. So we work toward that destiny. And the same can be true in the reverse. Like if you always, I'm going to go into this day, it's going to be miserable. I'm going to have so many people who are going to want everything. I'm going to be stressed. You're telling yourself that, and you start your day already stressed because you wound
Mhm.
yourself up. And so that's a different sort of example, but it's so true. Like what we tell ourselves, like, and I don't know if I've mentioned this, but if you go into the mirror and you look in the mirror and you say, I am just the ugliest person in the entire world. I don't like myself. I'm awful. Your face depicts what you are saying. But then if you look into the mirror again and say, I'm an amazing human being who's happy and I love life, like your face changes. And if you don't believe it, I encourage you to try it because I think it's I think it's true. And so in my journey over the last 6 years, in learning about thought work and getting certified as a coach, it it is amazing to me how much I have learned about, like I never thought the thoughts that I said really mattered, that they stuck anywhere. Like, oh, that's just some thought I had. But those thoughts are on repeat more than anybody else. I mean, Kevin could tell me that I'm beautiful 10 million times a day. And I could be telling myself that I'm ugly 5 times a day. It doesn't matter how many times he's telling me that because what I'm saying to myself is more believable. And I maybe not believable, but I hear it louder because it's here. And I think it's a hard concept if you haven't done thought, maybe not hard, but it's a different concept to think about that our thoughts really do matter and our
Mhm.
labeling ourselves really does matter.
Yes. I I loved what you said too when you talked about Kevin telling you you're beautiful versus you telling yourself you're ugly 5 times, right? And his telling you you're beautiful 20 times because it's not necessarily that the bad stuff's easier to believe. It's that your brain is going to hear and believe what you're telling it first.
Mhm.
That's, again, we go back to not listening to outside voices, but listening to our own. Your brain is listening to your own first, right?
Yep.
And that matters. So what you're telling yourself is absolutely what it's going to key into. It's going to remember it. And it's kind of goes back to like when we always ask little kids, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because it's important to have dreams and also to identify of what you want to be. Like, what
Mm.
is your goal? And how you talked about when you wake up and if you think you're going to be stressed and all this and you end up being stressed, it's really a good thing too in terms of it kind of taps into mental rehearsal. And this is something that we're taught during coaching certification school. But and maybe even something we could do a podcast directly on is mental rehearsal, but it's so important how you picture your day going. You do
Mhm.
have control over that. Yes, things can happen and make it whatever it's gonna be, but it is always how you're reacting to it, right? And that's something I've learned too. Like, even if stuff did go bad at work, you can react to it, you can make it more intense by getting stressed, or you can take a step back and think, okay, this is happening. Let's take a step back, whatever it might be. But I don't know if we realize how much power we have and how we are affecting ourselves from the day, not necessarily the day affecting us. Does that make
I
sense?
It makes 100% sense, and, you said the mental rehearsal, it is so important because we could go in thinking the day is horrible. Bad things could happen at the day that does make it seem horrible, but if we wanna stay stuck in that or look at, well, then how did I manage through it? I was a person who solved that problem. So you
Mhm.
could label yourself as a person who had a really bad day at work and everything is awful, or, you know what? It was a tough day at work. There were some challenges throughout the day, but I solved them and I figured it out. So you could be miserable or, maybe not super happy, but at least see what you were a problem solver.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, especially in my journey of weight loss, the identity thing has played such a big part with the binging that when I tapped into it this week, that I still am identifying as an emotional eater. It's essentially the same thing, just maybe a watered down version of binger. So that is what I'll be working on reframing. And I really think I have to put thought into like what I'm gonna say to myself or what I might say to other people when they ask about my journey, but I definitely will be taking out the statement, "I'm an emotional binger," or emotional eater. I will be working on that for sure. Because I think, especially for that, I don't know what you would want to work on or change your thought. Maybe it's the exercise part for you that you brought up, but like for me, emotionally eating in itself is not a bad thing. Every human will emotionally eat, and we've talked about that too here and there. Like,
Mhm.
you're gonna have cake because it's your birthday, or you're gonna and that's a happy time for most people, or you're gonna have cookies because it's the holiday, or whatever it might be. Emotional eating doesn't always mean something bad, but to me, I do equate it to a negative, and so it affects me, and it impacts me. And I want to if I'm eating a cookie because it's the holiday, that's great. I think that's great. And that is a version of emotional eating. But for me, when I say I'm an emotional eater, it absolutely means I'm eating because I'm upset or I'm stressed or whatever other negative emotion might be going on. So that's why it's important for me to work on that statement.
And it's true that every one of us has a different thought about labels. So for emotional eaters, you explain what that means to you. And at the same time that everything means something different to each of us, that power phrase, that sentence you're going to tell yourself that's going to create the pause, where you can move on from that label and be like, okay, I'm an emotional eater, but I'm this, or you know what I mean? Like we're all going to have a different level up thought, I guess, if you know what I mean? Like I'm not a woman who exercises. Tomorrow I'm willing to put my sneakers on. I'm a woman who is willing to do that. Like what we find to move us forward out of the thought that doesn't work for us, we're all going to have different ways to move out of that. It's finding what works for you. And like yesterday, Kevin had a situation that was making him very uncomfortable. Because he doesn't love computers and tech, and he was feeling like he was failing. And I'm like, maybe you could tell yourself that you're learning. And that wasn't working for him. Like that works for me all the time. And I think
Yeah.
that that's important to recognize too. Just like how we choose to lose weight is a very personal journey for all of us. How we
Mhm.
choose to level up the thoughts that don't work for us or the labels that we are creating for ourselves, how to change those is also an individual choice and journey.
Yeah, that's very true. It is all individual. And it's about tapping into what does work for you. Like I am learning doesn't work for him. I will say I love that you said you're willing to put on sneakers tomorrow. Because I think asking yourself what you're willing to do is so important. And that's kind of how I always end our thing, like wake up willing to do something that feels good to you. And that message is really about being willing to listen to yourself and ask yourself, like, what am I willing to do today? Like if you don't want to get up and walk in the morning, the next question would be like, am I willing to do it in the afternoon or am I willing to do it after lunch? Or what process are you willing to do for yourself? And I think it's such an important question to ask. And I ask myself that a lot. And we were talking about this before the podcast too, that I have been actively working on going to bed at 8:30 because I have realized for quite a while now, I've talked about going to bed on quite a few times in a podcast. And so I really wanted to focus on how can I achieve bedtime at 8:30 for myself? And what am I willing to change about my nightly routine to make that possible? So I had to really ask myself, like, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to maybe shift to a different time or whatever I needed to do to make it work? And I found a routine that worked this week and I got to bed at 8:30 and I will tell you that it's made such a huge difference because getting enough rest when I wake up in the morning and I would say 80% of the time I have the immediate thought, I don't want to get out of bed when the alarm goes off. But because I've had enough rest, I can ask myself, but are you willing to get up anyway? Or you really do want to get up because it's nice out, or you'll feel better walking, or whatever I say to myself back. But without the proper rest, I wasn't able to have that conversation because I was just tired. My body was tired, my brain was tired, and I wasn't at full capacity to have that essentially the conversation with myself about it. So I think when you ask yourself, are you willing? And that's something too, like, am I willing to look at how I do identify? What do I identify as? What do I call myself? In conversation, when people ask, what do I say about myself? Write it down. Do I really believe that? Does that feel good? Is that moving me forward? Like all kinds of things. Like, I'm a procrastinator. It's not necessarily the most helpful statement to make about myself. I believe it's true. I do have a procrastination issue. I have my whole life. But as I'm saying it doesn't help me to figure out how to change that because I do know that gets in the way of my day sometimes. So saying that reinforces that that's how I'm going to show up tomorrow. I'm a procrastinator, right? So you can't change it all at one time, but be
Mhm.
willing to ask yourself to write down some things that you say about yourself on a regular basis. I think we all know them if we just sat with ourselves for 5, 10 minutes and really tuned into it. And just pick one thing that you think that might not be helping me move forward. And think about how else you could change that or work towards a different way of thinking or what you do want to say about yourself instead of that. And even if it's not 100% true today, it doesn't have to. that's the whole point about who you identify as. That person who thought they wanted to be president at 10, 12, 20 years old wasn't president, but they made all the steps in their life to move forward and figure out how to achieve a goal that they wanted to achieve. Or, like I said, a teacher, anything that anybody's chosen to do in their life.
Yeah, and just one of my favorite things that I have learned is just because we've always thought it doesn't mean we always have to think it. So
Yes.
just because your schedule for the day has always been your schedule for the day
Mhm.
doesn't mean you can't adjust it to accommodate getting up and going for a walk and getting up and or going to bed at 8:30, right? Like
Mhm.
when you started, like, I'm never gonna go to bed at 8:30 maybe, and,
Mhm.
probably felt very odd to think of that or just different, and
Yes.
we can adjust things when it's important to us, we can adjust it, and like you said, you don't have to do it all at once, and it doesn't need to be a huge change to change every single label. If I had to change every
Mhm.
single label I call myself in one day, it
Yeah.
never I mean, I was
No.
telling my daughter that to me, this is gonna be so I am telling something that's just very strange for me, but growing up, we had one pair of shoes, really. We either had a pair of Mary Janes or we had sneakers. I don't think we ever had both at the same time. So in my head, wearing sneakers is like it's all you have to wear. So you wear them. So I have this thing like I can't wear sneakers outside of the house because people are gonna think I can't afford other shoes. You and I had this discussion, I think, via text. And so I have labeled myself so long as a person who can't go outside wearing sneakers because, God forbid, what are people going to think about me? Now, a lot of you might be thinking that is just silly that you think that. And you know what? It is, but it's something I have believed since I was probably 9. And
Mhm.
I have gone out several days this week wearing sneakers with a pair of shorts, and I don't think one person looked at me. I don't think anybody thought about it. And you know what? When I was out, I didn't think about it. I had sneakers on. I was going out. But these are the things that we're talking about, like the stories that we tell ourselves, the labels that we put on ourselves, like 50, well, I'm 55, so 9. So 46 years, right? I have been believing that story. This week, I was willing to tell myself a different version of that story. And that's what changing labels are too, just a difference.
Yes. A different story, a different perspective. You choose what you want to believe, right?
Mm,
And whatever you're believing is your truth.
yeah,
It just is. And we want to see what we're thinking and what we're telling ourselves and really work on that and try to change it to better ourselves and better our journey in weight loss. So even if there's somebody who thinks like I don't cook or I don't food prep, that might be true. Maybe you've never cooked anything, but you want to. You have the idea that that might make your journey easier. So let's think about how could you start that, right? So somebody who's never cooked, you could think, I'm going to learn how to food prep one meal this week. And it could be buying a rotisserie chicken that's already cooked, some frozen vegetables, and they even sell frozen rice that you can just throw in the microwave. So it's just like microwave it, put it in a dish, throw some sauce on it, you meal prepped a lunch, right? Super easy, attainable, doable, and not too much thought work, but now you're changing a behavior and you're like, I'm learning how to do this instead of I'm not this person.
yeah. And you're proving to yourself, like
Mhm.
every time we do something, every time I put on my sneakers, even if I don't go out for a walk, I'm putting my sneakers on, proving that I am willing to take that next step. And when it is, I don't know, but you know, after making the rotisserie chicken and the rice and the corn, that's proof you could do it. You don't know when you will do it again, but you can, and you've proved to yourself that you can. So I'd love to hear. I think it would be fun for people to share, like what labels have you put on yourself? Like what have you been telling yourself for years that you are, and is it true or isn't it? And if it's not, What is one small step toward a different thought that you could take to change that belief?
Yeah, I would love to hear that too.
Mm. I mean, it would and I think, what you share telling us that, you might inspire somebody else to, you may give a hint, because we all get help from everybody, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
sometimes leveling up, like me suggesting to Kevin, I'm learning. He may not have thought of that himself. So you don't know what you're putting down in these comments of what you're changing for your label. It might help somebody else change theirs.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, it was good to catch up with you on this podcast, April. I hope everybody is enjoying listening to what we're sharing.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. And again, we always invite anybody to ask questions on the Facebook page, or you can email. The Facebook page is April and Debbie Dish the Truth. And the email is the same, I think. April and Debbie Dish the Truth at gmail.com.
It is. It is the same. And we will see you next week. I am going to remind you to keep blooming because it's just, we're always growing. So keep moving forward and keep blooming.
Yes. And as always, wake up willing to do something that feels good to you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.